included in the current proposal for the 24-25 enrollment plan. To provide some context, on September 19th, staff members sorry. Have we started recording?
Yes.
Before we go any further, we'll go ahead and start recording. Okay.
Yes.
So to provide some context, on September 19th, staff members presented the first draft of a new student enrollment proposal to the Board of Education. This first draft includes proposed school assignment changes for the 2024-25 school year. This proposal includes a recommendation for the base attendance area for the new Woods Creek Elementary, which of course we'll discuss tonight, and that school is scheduled to open in July of 2024. There are also recommendations for associated middle school changes to align the feeder pattern for this new elementary school. In addition, this year's student assignment proposal also includes base assignment changes, calendar application changes, as well as recommended stability rules, all of which are in line with policy, as well as to help us relieve our capped and overcrowded schools, as well as to fill some of our underutilized schools. These changes will provide most of our students the opportunity to attend a school that is less crowded than their current school, as well as to have more efficient bus routes. In addition, the board will discuss options that allow families affected by the proposal the opportunity to apply for a stability transfer and remain at their current school without district transportation. The purpose of today's session is specifically to share information related to recommendations that are impacting the southern and southwestern areas of the county. In addition, we will also take time to address any questions that you may have related to these recommendations. Your feedback will be used as the second draft is prepared for the board, and the second draft is scheduled to be presented to the board on October 17th. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. Before we begin, let me go over some logistics. As I mentioned, part of our session today will be designated specifically to answer your questions that you have. And so to set the whole stage, our session will last no longer than an hour and a half. We will begin with our presentation and then conclude by responding to all of the questions from today's session. Throughout the session, if you have questions regarding the proposal or the recommended stability rules or suggestions for staff to consider, please post them to our thought exchange and use the term #session3. You can see it kind of highlighted here. So if you'll use the #session3, that will let us know that you're specifically in tonight's session. And as we're going through and monitoring the comments that are coming into the thought exchange, we'll know that that's a live question being posted today that you'd like to have addressed later in the session today. In addition, whoops, so sorry. Something is not working on my slide. In addition, we have an opportunity to use the QA feature in our Google Meet. I thought I had some visual instructions for you to be able to see those. So what I'll guide you to is on the lower right portion of your screen, if you're on the computer, there's a symbol stack that's a triangle, a square, and a circle. If you see that symbol stack in the lower right corner of your screen, you can click on that, and that'll give you the option to choose a question mark for the QA feature. That way you can post your question using sort of the internal meeting chat feature. So you have both options to present those questions, either through the thought exchange or using the QA feature. If you're on a mobile device, you may not see those shapes in the lower right of your screen, but you will see the 3 dots. So if you'll look for the 3 dots and click on the 3 dots, then you'll see that shape that's the triangle, the square, and the circle. If you'll select that, then you'll see the question mark. I apologize for the multiple clicks, but that will help you get to the ability to post the question. The way the question and answer feature works within the Google Meet is we have it set to anonymous so that no one else will see your question, so you can anonymously ask the question. What we'll do is take a copy of that question and save it, and then we'll remove it from the queue. So when you see that your question has been removed, that'll be an assurance that you know your question has been received and will be looked at as we get toward the end of the session. So again, throughout today's session, you can post comments or questions to the thought exchange using #session3 or use that Q&A feature. We're moving forward. As you may already be aware, Board Policy 4150 is the guiding policy for our school assignment and enrollment proposal processes. It includes 4 pillars: student achievement, stability, proximity, operational efficiency. And we're now going to show you a brief video that talks through that policy to help you get a better understanding. After the video, we'll come back and continue our presentation.
It's no secret that our school district is growing, and it's growing fast. That means each year we need to open new schools to stay ahead of the curve. To state the obvious, we have to fill these schools with students, and this can only be done through student assignment. Each year, some students are assigned to one of our new schools or reassigned to an existing school. This ensures we have balanced school populations across the district. We know families love their schools and that student assignment decisions can be worrisome. That's why we want to be completely transparent in how we make them. Our school board has established 4 pillars that guide each and every student assignment decision. Here's what they mean and how they work together. Student achievement. This is what we're all about as a school district. We know high concentrations of poverty or too many low-performing students in a school can hinder progress. This pillar compels us to think about whether a student assignment plan can help address some of those issues. Stability. Essentially, we try to keep as many children at their current school through the exit grade as possible. When reassignments are necessary, we provide the opportunity for some students to grandfather and stay at their current school through the exit grade. Operational efficiency. This pillar is about making sure all of our schools are at their best use. Overcrowded schools are a problem. Classrooms packed with too many students are one thing, but then there are the endless carpool lines, bathroom facilities that can't comfortably accommodate everyone, and having to start lunch when most people are still working on breakfast. On the flip side, having under-enrolled schools is an inefficient use of public resources, particularly when there are crowded schools nearby. Proximity. Okay, this one can be a little tricky. In a perfect world, houses would be built in neat little rows on a predictable timeline and at a slow and steady rate. As it is, we live in an imperfect world where lots and lots of homes pop up in one area while growth is slight or non-existent in others. For this reason, it is impossible to send every child to their most proximate school unless we wanted some of our schools bursting at the seams while others are half empty. That said, this pillar states that we will send students to schools within a reasonable distance. Often, the difference between the most proximate school and the next most proximate is no more than a couple of miles. Please remember that we must consider all 4 of these pillars when making assignment decisions. There is no priority among the 4 that applies in every situation. It's a balancing act that ultimately helps us come up with the best possible plan for everyone. Thank you for working with us to ensure our school system continues to serve all students well.
That video loves to restart. I hope that video was informative for you and helped to explain a little bit about how Board Policy 4150 is oriented and how we as staff follow that guidance. It does look like you've been able to, several of you, find that Q&A feature, but I do have a screen in just a moment for those of you that can't find it that'll help you with some visual aids. So again, if your question is posted and you see that it gets removed, then that's a confirmation we've received the question and it's been added to the queue so that we can address it toward the end of the session. I do want to note, I saw a question about whether or not we'll discuss the recommendations for Bryan Road in tonight's session. It is not part of our specific discussion for today. If we have time toward the end of the session and all the questions are answered, someone wants to ask about Bryan Road, we certainly can address that tonight, but we'll have a specific session talking about those recommendations tomorrow evening at the same time. All right, so what we're going to do now is talk through a little bit of what the board was given and also to share with you the story of how we get from sort of step 1 in our planning process to the point where we're making an enrollment proposal. So I do want to share that our enrollment planning process is a multi-year, multifaceted process that doesn't start with the first draft that's released. It usually begins a full year in advance where we're looking at the prior recommendations. We also have a process that's called the long-range forecast that our district undergoes every year, and that guides us. It's where we work with the local municipal partners to get residential and commercial development information so that we can understand how that, along with birth rates and other demographic information, can combine together to give us a good idea of where we're expecting growth and how much growth we're expecting over time. In addition, it'll share with us where we think we might be stabilizing and not having as much growth in other parts of the county. All of that information is used not only by our construction team to be able to figure out where we should site and select new schools or maybe enter into renovations, but it also impacts the work of our student assignment office as we're figuring out how to draw attendance areas for new schools and how to make adjustments to existing attendance areas to manage ongoing crowding concerns. So we'll start with our public engagement process because that then follows all of that. And then we'll give you a few updates on those capped and overcrowded schools that I mentioned, our current capital improvement plan, and then we'll dive into the recommendations for this particular area. So the updates here for the public engagement process, I'm assuming that most of you have already visited our website since you're here tonight for tonight's session. We know the link for tonight's session is available on that website. It was also made available through some principal emails as well. But we just wanted to make sure that if you haven't had a chance to visit the proposal website, that you knew that web address and you could get there. It is a one-stop shop for all information related to the proposal, and it even has links back to our previous engagement activities and all of that long-range planning and forecasting information I shared with you. This is the screen I was talking about. So I'm going to show this screen a couple of times throughout tonight's session to make sure that any question or thought or idea or suggestion that you might have that pops into mind, that you'll have this information to help you join us. So you can use the QR code to join the thought exchange, or you can directly link to it from our enrollment proposal website. If you are posting a comment tonight, we do ask that you use the hashtag session3. That way our moderators can monitor those comments that are coming into the thought exchange tonight and know that they're specifically being posted by a participant from tonight's session. We highly encourage you to put your thoughts and comments in the thought exchange because that is the public record or the public comment capture tool for our board and for this planning process. In addition, we did open up the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet. If you want to use the Q&A feature to ask a question, that's perfectly fine. Just know these may not get fully represented in all of the other public comments because those will all be combined using the thought exchange. However, we are happy to answer questions either way. To keep them confidential and anonymous, we won't post your questions in that Q&A feature. We'll simply capture them and we'll respond to them later tonight. So you can feel free to ask any confidential question that you'd like to ask. If it's about your student or your family in particular and you want to give us particular student information, we can reach out to you separately. But if it's just, I want to say that I like this or I don't like this or I have questions or I have a suggestion, you can feel free to do all of that, knowing that it'll be anonymous. You'll notice that if you're on your computer, you want to look for that symbol in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you're going to look for the 3 dots first and then look for the shapes. And then ultimately, you're looking for that question mark to find the QA feature. And again, it looks like several of you have been able to find that. I did see some questions are steadily streaming in. So that's exciting. But again, I did see a question about Bryan Road. That will be specifically discussed in tomorrow night's session, but you're welcome to stay on today and hear. Most of the presentation is the same except for the specific recommendations related to that campus. What we shared with the board is some of the information that we had already shared with them this summer, so I won't belabor this and spend too much time on it, but we did do some in-person community engagement activities around the areas where these new schools are located. In fact, we came out to the Woods Creek site because it had been completed and the Balcom students were there. So we hosted a session on April 27th there. We invited all students in the impact area that are families in the impact area that had kindergarten, first or second grade students last year to join us for that. So maybe some of you were able to join us for that. In addition, we also did outreach with that same group of families to encourage them to participate in a thought exchange related to the opening of Woods Creek. A couple of the questions we wanted to discuss with our families in this session were this first question about what are the most important things that district leadership should be aware of and take into consideration when managing enrollment growth and school crowding. And as you can see here, this is a short summary. There's a more detailed summary on our website in the future schools section, but this is a short summary of what we gathered across all of the sessions that we held. And some that I drew attention to during our presentation on the 19th were allowing for cohort continuity, being able to start or stay and start at the same school where possible, and also avoiding multiple assignments from the same neighborhood to different schools, to try to make sure that neighborhoods as much as possible get to attend the same schools. So a lot of those did influence some of our recommendations this year, as well as other comments that we received throughout that process. Another question that we posed to all of the participants at this time, and again, we did this question through a thought exchange, so even if they weren't able to attend the event, they were able to at least participate in the thought exchange. And we asked families, what are the most important things that we should, or leadership should be aware of and take into consideration when opening a new school? And again, as a reminder, we were specifically going out and looking at the new schools that are going to be opening over the next couple of years and engaging families in dialogue around that. And so again, the information that we received specifically from Woods Creek gave us some really important supports to help us think about how we wanted to propose an assignment area for the school. Across all the sessions, these were the core themes that showed up. All of this is posted to our website, so if you want to look at it a little bit slower, you're certainly welcome to, but I know we want to get to the question and answer period, so I'm just going to kind of skim through these as quickly as possible. But I did want to display this particular result. So when we did the thought exchange asking what we should think about in terms of the community, the majority of participants in that thought exchange specific to the Woods Creek area said proximity, transportation, and continuity were most top of mind in terms of the top 3 rated sort of categories and themes. Obviously, school operations, plans for growth, school choice, and crowding were acknowledged as well. All right. What we then learned after all of that public engagement was we still have a few, lingering questions as staff. There were some terms that were thrown around in these sessions like cohorts or keeping kids together or cohort continuity. And we wanted to really dig into that a little bit deeper with some families and ask them how to better understand what the intent of that language is. We also noticed that there were some conversations about school calendar, but not a lot of conversations about school calendar. So we really wanted to probe deeper into that concept about calendar alignment and when to use things like a multi-track year-round calendar to address growth and crowding. We also wanted to make sure that we took that feedback and thought about how we crafted our stability rules for this current proposal. And we also wanted to look at those feeder patterns, again, just taking into account the conversations that were had in all of these sessions. The focus groups then were held in June, so we had invited families from those same groups to just say, hey, if you're interested in talking with us in more detail, could you please? So I will say that we have to always put a note of caution when we're talking about focus group results because they are smaller groups of participants. And in this case, they were specifically representative of those areas where the new schools are opening. So we do as a district need to be careful not to broadly use the feedback we got from the focus groups to make big sweeping recommendations across the entire district. But certainly it's helpful as we're looking at this particular region of the county. So we did partner with our data research and accountability department to host these focus groups. And what we learned from these focus groups was that keeping students together was really a sort of summative and summary idea that came out of these discussions about cohort continuity. What we also found is that keeping students together had multiple definitions depending on each family's circumstance. And so that was very insightful for us as a group to be able to gather that feedback and think through that. So ideas like keeping students from the same neighborhood together, maybe that's what you mean by cohort continuity, or maybe making sure that students that are on a particular track or calendar are allowed to stay on that track or calendar over time. That might be a definition of keeping students together for a particular family or group. And for some, it might be very simplistically, if we're in 5th grade together and we're transitioning to middle school, can we all go to the same middle school? Or if we're in 8th grade together and we're transitioning to high school, could we please, try to work to keep us all at the same high school? So lots of different interpretations, but the real summary goal is that once students form those strong relationships, keeping them together as they move through school is really a preference for families. And as you can see, families really feel that there's an opportunity to improve academic performance ultimately by being able to maintain these bonds. The year-round calendar, again, as I mentioned on this slide just before, we need to be careful not to expand this across the entire district or across multiple regions. But in this particular area, again, where the new schools are opening, again, Woods Creek is one. The year-round calendar came up as a resounding sort of preference to the alternatives for dealing with growth, such as capping or reassignment. And so that was just good information for us to have. Again, we need to be cautious with how broad a brush we use this information with across the entire district, but it was very insightful for us to hear that in areas that are personally experiencing high rates of growth, that the use of a year-round calendar to increase capacity at a school was an option that wasn't terribly destabilizing for families. We also ask families to give us some input on whether or not a K-8 calendar alignment or a 6-12 calendar alignment would be preferred. So for context, if a family has a student in elementary school, let's say on a multi-track year-round elementary school, is the preference as they move forward in school to, let's say, middle school and high school, to go ahead and transition to traditional at 6th grade and then have that calendar continuity going through high school. As you may be aware, the vast majority of our high schools are on the traditional calendar, and we don't have multi-track year-round calendar at the high school level. So we know that at some point your students will come off of that multi-track calendar. The other option that we also hear is that, well, we'd like at least K-8 continuity in that sort of perspective, that if I have a multi-track year-round elementary school, we'd like a multi-track year-round middle school so we can have that calendar continuity from kindergarten through 8th grade, particularly if we have children on different grade levels, to be able to have a similar calendar. So when we pose the question, which do you prefer, the K-8 or the 6-12, we really got mixed results. It was very inconclusive with the focus groups. We did find that there were explanations to the benefits of the K-8 alignment, particularly for younger students and having some stability there. There were even discussions about students with special needs doing better with that K-8 calendar continuity. For the 6-12 alignment, we did hear families saying that, hey, once my students starting to move into high school, there's lots of other things that are happening outside of school or extracurricular activities, and that traditional calendar is really more preferred a little bit earlier and not wait till 9th grade, but go ahead and transition at 6th grade. So again, because these results are inconclusive, we're going to continue to probe this question with our families over time and think about it case by case, region by region, area by area. But we did want to share that those were the results we received from our focus groups. As we continue forward in our public engagement, I just want to give you a snapshot of where we are for draft 1. So the first draft was presented, as I mentioned, on September 19th. Our thought exchange has been open since that time, and it will continue to be open through this Friday, October 6th. And then we've been hosting virtual public information sessions focusing on the different regions that were recommended or that have recommendations. So we've already completed the first 2 last week for the Northwestern area, the Central, Northern, and Northeastern areas. And then today, of course, we're participating in the Southern and Southwestern area discussion. Tomorrow night, we'll host our last virtual information session for this first draft that will specifically focus on the Southeastern area, and we'll have a sufficient amount of time for us to do a general overview. So if you have any friends or family that were not able to join tonight that you think would value a live information session to be able to ask their questions live, please encourage them to join us tomorrow. Otherwise, as Corrali mentioned at the opening, we are recording tonight's session, so you're certainly welcome to encourage people to visit our website and watch the recording, again, as you find this beneficial. I told you I was going to show you this slide a couple of times because I know not everybody jumps right into those question and answer options. So again, at any point during the session, if you have a question, please post your question to the thought exchange using the hashtag session3. That will ensure that all board members can see your question, thought, comment, idea. It'll also mean that it'll be part of our analysis as we're sharing results of all of our feedback gathering with the board at the October 17th meeting. However, if you just want to pop a quick question right here in the Google Meet, you can use the Q&A feature. And again, if you're on your computer, you're looking at that bottom bar. If you're on a mobile device, you're looking for the 3 dots first, and then you'll find that way to get in there. And one more final time, and then I won't say it again. If you do post a question using the Q&A feature, when you see that it's been removed, that's your confirmation that it has been captured, and we will address that question toward the end of tonight's session. All right, a couple of other things we need to think about. We're constantly thinking about how to efficiently use our facilities, and so capped and crowded schools often come up as a conversation topic. So we do have 20 elementary schools in the district that are currently capped, and as a reminder, a capped school is a school that has reached a limit to where if any new students come into that base attendance area, there may not be room for them at their grade level, and so the board has identified a designated overflow school or alternate school that the student would be assigned to instead. And as you can see by the highlighting, there are several elementary schools in this general area that do have caps. If a school is capped, then that means that, again, either the growth is already there. So some of these schools are what we call actively capping, meaning they have already hit that upper number, and they may have hit that upper number on all grades. So any new student moving into the area will be assigned to that alternative school or overflow school. Others may be getting there. Perhaps the growth is coming in the next couple of months. Maybe there's a new subdivision that's slowly starting to sell their plots and sign their contracts. And so they may not be actively capping today, but perhaps they could be capping by October or later in October, November, December, January. There's a chance they could be, capping at some point during the school year. So the majority of the schools on this list are actively capping. There are a handful that may still be in that preventative phase where that hasn't happened yet. So if a new family moves in, they could go to the school, but I can't guarantee that all year long. This graphic then is one that we've been sharing with the board since February. It talks about displays for you. In addition to cap schools, we also just have general crowding concerns. Not all of our crowded schools are capped. And so we do have some that are already projected to be over and 110%. So if you see the red highlighted areas, those represent base attendance areas for schools that are projected to be over 110% crowded this year. Some of those are also capped schools. You'll also notice that there are some that are colored orange, and those represent schools that are projected to be between 100 and 110% crowding this school year. And then the yellows are between 90 and 100. You might think that highlighting 90 to 100 doesn't make sense because that's kind of where we want our schools to operate, but we do want to be mindful and keep an eye on those because some of those schools are in high growth areas, which means they could quickly jump over that 100% crowding level. And so we just want to continue to monitor those campuses to see if they need additional supports. As you can see, in the southern and southwestern area, there are a number of schools that are projected to be crowded and are already capped. I see that a handful of people are trying to use the raise the hand feature. If you'll please just put your comments or questions into the thought exchange or using the QA feature, we will address your questions toward the end of the session. At the middle school level, there are also schools in your region that are capped. And at the high school level, there's also a high school that's capped. So just keeping a mindfulness that there is a lot of growth in this area. Similarly, we have a middle school crowding map. So this lets you know, again, in the southern and southwestern area, we have quite a few schools that are projected to be overcrowded at the middle school level. And we also have quite a few high schools across the entire district that are projected to be at or above 100% crowding. And then, of course, the yellows represent those that are in that watch zone where they're between 90 and 100. All right, so what do we have on the horizon that might address this? So that's one thing that we always want to make sure we're sharing with our families and with our board is that we do have a capital improvement plan that has been approved, and it basically is projecting for us where new schools are coming. In addition to the new schools, the capital improvement plan does have other budget line items for major renovations and minor renovations. We don't specifically call those out here, but in this region, you might be aware of the major renovation that's happening at Baucom Elementary. So that's an example of the other types of capital improvement projects that are happening throughout the district at the same time that we're building new schools. As you can see, for 24-25, Woods Creek is the only school that's projected to open as a brand new school for 24-25. Currently, you may be aware that students from Baucom are hanging out and learning and enjoying education activities at the Woods Creek campus while their campus is being renovated. That is projected to be completed this school year, so then they'll transition back to their campus for the 24-25 school year, and then Woods Creek will be refreshed a little bit and ready to open up with its brand new student population for the 24-25 school year. You'll see the second column labeled 2025-26, showing all of the schools that are projected to open for the 25-26 school year, several of which are in the same general area. So you'll see us coming back out and having more community engagements this spring to continue to talk about these schools that are opening. And then you'll see that there's a few schools in the out years, the Morrisville High School and the Pool Road site. So just so you know where they're physically located, the circle of red represents the physical location of Woods Creek, which I'm presuming many of you are familiar with, because I think most of you are probably impacted by that with the recommendations we're going to discuss today. In blue, you see the locations of all the schools that are projected to open for 25-26. And in this sort of dark gray black color, you're seeing those that are in those out years. So just gives you an idea of where they're all located throughout the district. Okay, so what we came for, the first draft of the enrollment plan. So we're going to talk through the specific recommendations for your area, the southern and southwestern areas, and we're also going to talk through some of the reasonings why the recommendations came into place. But again, as I told you, I'll show you the slide a whole bunch of times. So just a reminder, if you want to ask a question for today's session, please post it to the Thought Exchange using #session3 or use the QA feature here in the Google Meet. One final reminder, if you put it in the QA in the Google Meet, it won't necessarily be joined with, and the board members won't be able to see all of the questions that you're asking, but we certainly will use those to update our frequently asked questions section of our website as possible. Let's talk about the recommendations for base assignment changes. So just a quick overview of all the schools that are impacted throughout the district. We won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I just wanted you to see that there are other areas that are impacted recommendations or base assignment change recommendations. At the middle school level, this gets you a look. The middle school recommendations for this year's enrollment plan are specifically complementary to the elementary school recommendations. So any middle school base assignment change that's being recommended here is to either align the feeder pattern with that elementary school change or to align the calendar with that elementary school change. And usually it's both. At the high school level, again, a small handful of changes, all right, based on recommendations. In fact, in this particular case, these are all based on recommendations related to Leesville Road High School. And so we won't discuss those in today's session. All right. I find that a lot of our families' most important questions for their own self and for their thinking for their families are about the impact on me and my family. So if my address is in the proposal and being recommended to change, let's say from Apex Elementary, Oakview Elementary, Holly Springs Elementary, to become part of the new Woods Creek Elementary, or maybe I'm at Holly Springs Elementary and I'm in the proposal, my address is in the proposal to shift to Oak Grove Elementary. And I think another one in this area would be my address is currently in the Banks Road Elementary area and I'm being recommended to come to Westlake. So those will be the ones that we sort of talk through. And there are some middle school recommendations as well. At the Woods Creek level, so if your recommendation is for your address to move from wherever you're currently assigned to into Woods Creek Elementary, we do have slightly more restrictive stability rules currently recommended, only because when we're opening a new school, we do need to ensure that there's a sufficient population of students to be able to make sure the school can operate properly, hire a sufficient amount of teachers, be able to offer all of the proper courses. You certainly want to make sure that any students that are attending the new school have the full array of specials, have their assistant principals, their counselors, have the funding for all of those things that make a school vibrant and thriving. And so there are some more restrictive stability rules that we come up with and that we recommend for new schools. That being said, here we've been slightly less restrictive. And that we've traditionally, when opening a new school, would only recommend that rising 5th grade students be allowed to stay at their current school, and that any siblings that are coming in or that are with them could stay for that 1 year. However, this year, based on all the feedback we received through the public engagement process and this desire for stability and cohort continuity, we did expand the recommendation to include rising 4th graders as well. So in the current proposal, the recommendation that is rising 4th and 5th grade students that are already at an existing Wake County school that are recommended to be assigned into Woods Creek Elementary, that those students would be allowed to stay at their current school if they would like to, without district transportation. In addition, any of their younger siblings would also be allowed to join them and stay through the 5th grade. That's also a change from previous stability rules. Previous stability rules would only allow those younger siblings to stay for that 1 year with their older sibling and then transition to the new school afterward. So we have tried to bake in a little bit more stability, a little bit more cohort continuity for families of those students in the rising grades. I want to just take a brief moment. I did see that another one of our joined us, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, so thank you for joining us. And again, I do see a handful of people are using the raise the hand feature. Again, if you'll please just post your questions to the thought exchange or to the Q&A feature, that's going to be the best place to get your question captured. In addition, because in this area there are some middle school recommendations as well as recommendations related to Banks Road and Westlake Elementary, those are not new schools. So we have even more generous stability rules proposed for those types of recommendations. So students in these situations, if they're already attending the school and they're being proposed to change, maybe let's say from Apex or Apex Friendship Middle into Lufkin, they'd be allowed to stay, but the new students would then need to go ahead and go on to the new assignment. And then in the case of the Banks Road and the Westlake, if you're already attending Banks Road, if you'd like to stay, you're welcome to do so. It's just new students would need to go on to the new school assignment based on the address. All right, we'll come back to those stability rules again in a few minutes, but I think it's very helpful to try to address as many of those questions right here on the outset. So let's talk about the specific recommendations. I've mentioned it several times, and I'm sure it's not lost on many of you that there's a new elementary school, Woods Creek, that'll be opening in July of 2024. And the current recommendation in the first draft of the proposal is that it open on the multi-track year-round calendar at a capacity of 924. And so that recommendation is being made based on what I showed you earlier with all the projected growth and the projected crowding and what we know about on upcoming residential development in this area. The more capacity we can have at this school, the better, because it would provide as much stability as we can for these families as that growth continues in this region. Impacted schools are Apex Elementary, Holly Springs Elementary, and Oakview Elementary. All three of these schools have areas that are being recommended to become part of the Woods Creek assignment area. And as you can see in the table below, their Apex Elementary is currently on traditional, Oakview is currently on traditional, Holly Springs is currently on multi-track. So we do acknowledge that with this recommendation, not only is it an assignment change, but for some families, it's also a calendar change. And we do understand that, and we recognize that that provides its own challenges. But you can also the crowding level is for the schools if we make no change. So the way this table presents is if we make no changes to the assignment areas for these schools, the number that you see on the right is the projected crowding for these schools next year if we aren't able to provide some sort of relief. So now let's look at the map. Let me orient you to the map. The picture on the left represents the current attendance area for the existing schools. So the bluish color that kind of trails down to the left of your screen, that represents the current Oakview Elementary base. The more lavendery or light purple color that's kind of in the center of this section represents portions of the existing Holly Springs Elementary base attendance area. The darker purple, just a little bit to the right of that, represents the current Oak Grove Elementary base attendance area. And the yellow or orangish color that you see just above US 1 represents the current, I'm so sorry, excuse me, the current Apex Elementary base attendance area. What you'll also see in the map on the left are some sort of hashed out areas, some marked up areas. Those represent what's being recommended to join the Woods Creek or become the Woods Creek Elementary base attendance area. So the picture on the right represents what that resulting map would look like if draft 1 is approved as presented. And we have heard from several communities in this area that are either in favor of or have questions or concerns about the recommendations. And we certainly want to address any of those that we can today. If we look at the next map, I did want to show you, might have noticed that there's a portion of the existing Holly Springs Elementary base attendance area that instead of being recommended to join Woods Creek Elementary is actually being recommended to join Oak Grove Elementary. As you can see, it's contiguous with other sections of Oak Grove Elementary that are along 1010 Road. And so this would provide a little bit more proximate assignment for these students and again, provide further relief for Holly Springs Elementary. For this particular recommendation going from Holly Springs to Oak Grove, since this is an existing school to an existing school, this would have the more generous stability rules. So any families with addresses in this circular area would have that ability to ask for a stability transfer at all grades. Now let's talk about what happens with the sort of crowding and capacity. As you can see, we have quite a bit of growth and crowding that need to be addressed in this region. Looking at, I'm going to go back to the map just for a minute. There have been a lot of questions that I've seen through the thought exchange about, why this neighborhood, why not that neighborhood, why this, why that. You can see that we really worked hard to develop a contiguous and connected attendance area for the school and to grab entire neighborhoods. We really worked hard to not splinter neighborhoods where at all possible, so that if all of your houses that are in your particular address group off of the main entrance. Now I will be cautious and say if it's a multi-phase subdivision that has multiple phases, we might have had to focus on a single phase, but we worked really hard to keep that whole group together so that the students could move as a group together in this new assignment. Again, we recognize that the calendar change presents some, concerns for families and for others. Just that change of school from what you already have to something different, it can certainly be its own set of concerns. Looking at the crowding again, so looking at the top table, what this shows us is, again, if we do nothing, if we make no assignment recommendations or no changes in this area, these 4 schools would show that level of crowding for 24-25, and then are projected to have the level of crowding you see in the final column for the 26-27 school year. You'll notice that all of the capacity and utilization rates talk about with trailers, yet you may be at a campus where you're thinking, wait, I'm not sure there's trailers on our campus. The with trailers capacity value is simply the max value capacity for that campus for the 24-25 school year. So if you have a campus that has no trailers, this is simply, your main campus capacity. But if you do have a campus that has some trailers, then this would include those as well. So you can see that something like Apex Elementary is showing that it would be 110% crowding if we made no adjustments. You can see Oakview Elementary by 26-27 would be at 156% crowding based on all the residential development that's coming in that area. So clearly concerns. The tables below then for the 24-25 base school title that you see on the lower half of the screen, that reflects if the plan is adopted as recommended and every single student impacted takes the assignment in the first year. So we recognize that's not going to happen. We do know that families will exercise that right, or that, those eligibility rules that they have for stability rules to be able to stay at their current school. So we do project honestly that this will be a much more gradual change. But even still, if every single student that was recommended to be reassigned out of, let's say, Holly Springs into Woods Creek goes into Oak Grove as well, you would see that would be a significant reduction in enrollment for Holly Springs Elementary. We do not predict that that would all happen in the first year. And you may not be aware, but there are also several trailers on that campus. And so we are working to reduce the need to use those trailers as well. So it will be much more gradual. On the other side of the coin, if you look at Oakview Elementary, even if everybody that we're recommending that's currently assigned to Oakview comes into Woods Creek, and even if every single one of them came on year one, we would still have a projected crowding at Oakview of 111% for the 24-25 school year, and an ever increasing crowding of 128% in the out years. And this doesn't, I also have, we have data that shows what those projections are going out even further, but this just gets you a quick snapshot for the next couple of years. So the concerns for Oakview and the reasons why we did look to pull some areas from the Oakview base attendance area was just to provide what relief we possibly could here with the opening of Woods Creek Elementary. The goal over time is to get caps off of schools, remove those caps so that families in the attendance area can attend. However, we're not confident that this solves all of that challenge for Oakview, just by way of example, looking at the list here. You can also see that the recommendations here would better utilize the campus at Oak Grove Elementary, which we think is beneficial to this region as well. You'll notice that Woods Creek would not be at 100% in those first couple of years. You'll also notice there's an error on the slide. I've kept it in here because it's how it was presented to the board. We'll get the corrections made for draft 2, but that capacity with trailers really should read 924, which does adjust those percentages to 64 and 74. But we don't ever want our schools to open at 100% in a high growth area, because then they'd be capped the very next year. So whenever we can, when we have the opportunity to do so, when the facility allows for it and the calendar allows for it and all of that, we do try to fill them closer to maybe a 60 or 70% first year, so that we can then monitor and manage that growth over the coming years. That way the seats are there and we don't have to hit a cap so soon. So that's the goal here for Woods Creek. Okay. I mentioned that there were some middle school complementary recommendations in this area. As I mentioned, with the recommendation that Woods Creek open as a multi-track year-round, there are some attendance areas that are currently at Oakview Elementary and either Apex Friendship Middle, or I think it's Apex Elementary and Apex Middle. And so those areas are being recommended to also have a middle school change to align with the calendar, to get that K-8 calendar continuity that we saw was important for families. In addition, if you don't recall, the campuses here, Apex Friendship Middle and Apex Middle, are extremely crowded. Apex Friendship Middle is one of our capped middle schools. So we did want to, this also helps us with relieving some of the pressure on those two campuses over time. Again, because this is an existing move to an existing move, any student who's already attending Apex Middle or Apex Friendship Middle would have the ability to put in that stability request and get that approved, and be able to stay without transportation. And then new families moving into the area would be assigned to Lufkin Road Middle. And families that would like to take the change because they're over to Woods Creek and want to have that calendar continuity, they would automatically be assigned to the base and wouldn't need to take any action. And as you can see here, this does provide a little bit of relief for Apex Middle and Apex Friendship Middle, to where they can have a little bit more sustainable population size. And then over time, of course, our goal would be to get to the point where we could remove the cap at Apex Friendship Middle long term. Don't think we can do it in this first year, but this does start the progress towards that effort. Right. The other move we want to talk about in this area, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is that Banks Road Elementary is in an area that's around this region as well. The yellow line that you see towards the top of the screen represents 540. Excuse me. The future 540. It's not been completed yet. The black line that's running down the middle represents, I believe that's Fayetteville. Yeah, that's Fayetteville Road. So just to kind of orient you, the sort of pinkish area represents the current Banks Road attendance area. And then the sort of turquoisey blue color represents the current Westlake Elementary attendance area. Banks Road Elementary is in a high growth area. It's going to be relieved by Hilltop Needmore soon, but that school won't open until 25-26. And so I'll show you the crowding impacts. Right now, if we don't make any adjustments to Banks Road with the growth in its base attendance area, while we wait for Hilltop Needmore to open up, it will be an unsustainable rate of growth. And so we are making a recommendation to go ahead and do an early, what I call a phase 1 adjustment, where we're taking a portion of the existing Banks Road Elementary base attendance area that we know won't be impacted by the opening of Hilltop Needmore and going ahead and pre-assigning that to Westlake Elementary. This area is already assigned to Westlake Middle and Middle Creek High School, so there isn't a complementary middle or high school recommendation. Westlake Elementary then would be better utilized by this recommendation, and it would set the school up to be prepared and just give us that 1 year that we need while we're waiting for Hilltop Needmore to open up. I do want to pause for a moment and go back a couple slides because I noticed that I didn't mention anything about a high school move in this area. You may be familiar with the Felton Grove High School campus. That campus is supposed to open in 25-26. We're fairly certain that this region will be impacted by the opening of that school. So we wanted to wait until 25-26 to make any high school recommendations related to the opening of Woods Creek. So you won't see any high school recommendations for this area just yet because we're waiting for the opening of that school. All right. We're getting close to the end. So one more time, just want to do the show you how to put your comments in. I know we had a couple of people join us late. So if you'll go into the thought exchange and use hashtag session3, that'll help us identify that the question is coming from today's call. Or if you want to use the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet, you're absolutely able to do that. Just know that those may or may not be totally combined with all the thoughts that are in the thought exchange. That is the official public comment tool. All right, so before we get to those questions, a couple of other things we want to talk about are the recommendations for calendar application changes. You'll notice that there are some areas that say current base of this, current calendar application of this in the middle column, and then proposed calendar application school of this over in the third column. So what does all of this mean? The column on the left represents if you have an address that's in the base attendance area for one of these schools, and you currently use our address lookup tool to look at your application options, and you see something called a calendar application choice that comes with district transportation, that's what you're going to see in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide to show you some examples from your area. So for example, Laurel Park Elementary as a base attendance area that currently some students see Bauckham Elementary, Davis Drive Elementary, or Penny Road Elementary as a traditional calendar application option. What that means is if they get seated at that school through the transfer process, they are actually eligible for district transportation. As you may be aware, we're significant challenges and stresses on our transportation system. And so in an effort to support that, we're simply asking or making the recommendation that families that previously had transportation to these choices, that the transportation would be removed. It doesn't mean that families can no longer ask for a seat at Bauckham or ask for a seat at Davis Drive. It simply means that if you are approved for that, it would be approved through the transfer status without district transportation. However, Bauckham Elementary you'll see is listed with an asterisk. So any families that still see Bauckham Elementary on their list, those families would still be able to apply for that with transportation for the time being. This sounds like a lot, and I know it is, and so we can answer individual questions as we need to. But the main goal here is to take better use of our base assignments to reduce the pressures on the transportation system. However, in some cases, it may be beneficial for the schools to maintain the enrollment that's coming from the calendar applications, and so we're sort of gradually moving toward that release of pressure on the transportation system. In a handful of cases, you'll also see something in the middle column that has two asterisks. So in those examples, which it doesn't look like it impacts this area, but maybe if you're nearby, in those cases, any students who currently attend that school with transportation would be able to keep their transportation until they get through the 5th grade, but no new students would be able to get that transportation. Again, it's part of that gradual release of pressure on that transportation network. These are all posted to our website, so if you want to look at them a little bit more slowly and in more detail, you're welcome to do so. Or if you want to use our address lookup tool for draft one, that's also a way you can just look up your personal address and see what those change recommendations are. At the middle school level, there are a number of recommendations that impact this area. So again, if the school on the left is your current base and the schools in the middle are schools that you may see on your lookup and that you might be able to apply for with transportation, we're not saying that you can't ask for those schools anymore. We're simply saying that if we can approve those, that there would be no transportation. I will do a note of caution. If one of the schools is a CAP school, like I see the Lufkin Road choice at Apex Friendship, the likelihood that we would be able to approve transfers is very low because obviously the school's already having challenges managing the students that live in its base attendance area. However, if you have an existing student who's already at the school with the transportation this year, they would be eligible for that stability transfer to stay for next year and just not have district transportation. So anything that's in the calendar application slides would apply to that more generous set of stability rules. And I'll show those to you again in a moment. I'm sure that'll generate a lot of questions, and I hope they're good ones so we can really talk through that. All right, so the recommended stability rules, as I mentioned, we talked about these before we got started. So again, anybody who's being recommended to be assigned into the new Woods Creek Elementary would have these slightly more restrictive stability rules where students rising into 4th or 5th grade would be eligible to stay at their current school with transfer status or no district provided transportation. And any younger siblings, including that rising kindergarten student, would be able to join them and stay at that school through the 5th grade. So these are the most generous stability rules we've offered in a very long time for the opening of a new school. Again, this is to address the public feedback that we heard about trying to keep students staying where they started, as well as keeping families together on campuses. We recognize that this will put a little bit of pressure on those sending schools or those schools of origin. That means that crowding will persist a little bit longer, but we felt like it was a stability option that we can offer families to, again, provide for that continuity for you. Any of the other recommendations, the middle school recommendations that I discussed in today's session, the recommendations related to Oak Grove Elementary, and the recommendations related to West Elementary, in addition, all the recommendations that I briefly kind of skimmed through about the calendar application changes, all of those recommendations would be eligible for this set, for this set of more generous stability rules, where if you're already at the school and you'd like to stay through the end grade, so if it's middle school 8th grade, if it's elementary 5th grade, you'd be able to do so as long as you can provide your own transportation. We do recognize that providing your own transportation can be an obstacle or a challenge for some families. Just in our current transportation environment, we just can't continue to provide transportation to all of these stability options. Okay. There's your reminder. Put your questions and thoughts in if you haven't already done so. I think we've got quite a few that have come in, so I'm really excited for our Q&A section. Our timeline and next steps. So just to give you a heads up about where we're going, and then we'll jump into the questions. So obviously we made our first presentation on September 19th. We'll come back to the board on October 17th with a revised draft, which will include a lot of information regarding our public feedback and our engagement activities so that the board can fully evaluate and analyze all of the information that we've received over these last several weeks. The board will be hosting a public hearing on November 8th. So it's an official public hearing specifically for the purpose of hearing public comment on the 24-25 enrollment proposal. Information about that public hearing will be posted for signing up and registering to speak will be posted to the website closer to the date. And then November 21st, we're scheduled to bring back a final draft and seek approval for that plan so that families will know shortly after what's been approved and how they're impacted. Again, we talked through this at the beginning of the session, but here's where we are with the draft 1 feedback. We have one more public information session tomorrow night. So again, if you have friends, family, neighbors that couldn't attend today that you think this would be valuable for, please invite them to join us tomorrow or to watch the recording of this session when it's posted later this week. All right, I think we're here. I think we're at the point now where we're ready to start answering our questions. So if you've not had a chance yet to post your question, or if you've just thought of one, please feel free to use these tools for posting those questions. I'm going to take a sip of water, and then Corrali's going to help us go through the questions and answer absolutely as many as we can before our time is up today.
Yes. Okay, let's start from the top. If we apply for the stability transfer to stay at Oakview, can we opt to go to Apex Friendship Middle School and not Lufkin?
Great question. I saw several questions like this in the thought exchange as well, so I'm glad it came up today. The short answer to that is no. The longer answer is your base assignment would then switch to Lufkin Road Middle, and then you could put in a request for transfer asking for the school, but it wouldn't be a guaranteed automatic stability transfer because the students never attended the school yet. We get that this might create a calendar shift for families. So we would encourage those families that opt to stay at their school on the traditional calendar that maybe are based at a year-round middle school to really explore those options. There's multiple ways to ask for a school with a different calendar. One of which, of course, is our magnet application period. The vast majority of our magnet middle schools are on the traditional calendar. So they have amazing programming. And if that meets your needs, that's great. Otherwise, you could use the request for transfer process that comes a little later in the spring, and you can ask for any traditional calendar middle school that would meet your needs that you could provide transportation to.
All right. Are Laurel Park families affected due to the rezoning of the neighborhood?
I think the short answer to that question is some. If a student is currently in one of the traditional calendar-based attendance areas that's being recommended to go to Woods Creek, so I think there are some families that are in the portion that's assigned to Apex Elementary as a base, and they've used the year-round application process to ask for Laurel Park. Those families would be reassigned to Woods Creek since the year-round calendar would now be offered at your base school. You would be eligible under the same Woods Creek stability rules to ask for a transfer to stay at Laurel Park. So if you're rising into 4th or 5th grade, you'd be allowed to stay. And siblings would be able to join. However, if you are one of the younger students, then your assignment would switch to Laurel Park. I'm going to pause there for just a moment too. The stability transfer window that I'm talking about when I say it's guaranteed, that will happen shortly after the board approves the plan. We will start from our office pushing messaging out to all the families that are directly impacted by the approved changes, saying, okay, here are your options, and here's how you put in your stability transfer. Go online, click this link, put in your request. If you put in your request during that window, I can guarantee that it'll be approved. And that'll be the late November, early December timeframe. Once that is closed, then the guaranteed stability transfers are done. When we get to the regular request for transfer period, if you have a specific reason why you really want to ask for a transfer, but you weren't eligible under the stability rules, you can still submit that request. I just want to caution you that we'll be looking at the crowding of the school. We'll be looking at how many students elected to stay, and we'll have to look at those on a case-by-case basis, using our policy on transfers. So there is still a way you could technically request that transfer, even if you weren't automatically eligible for the stability rules, and we'll look at those one by one. So I don't want to give false hope, but I also want to make sure you're aware of all the ways that you can ask for those transfers. So if you ask for the stability transfer in the late fall, like I said, late November, early December timeframe, we can guarantee those. The requests that come in later, we look at one by one and process them individually.
What were the specific criteria for selecting a given neighborhood to be rezoned?
This is one of those answers that is complicated, right? It's first we started by looking at all of the pillars. So we're looking at proximity, we're looking at stability, we're looking at transportation networks, which aren't always amazing, but we're trying really hard. So if your neighborhood, egresses or exits onto a particular main artery that has an easy connection to the school, we'll take that into consideration. We also were looking at providing relief to nearby schools. So sometimes we do recognize that neighborhoods might currently be assigned to a closer school and being recommended to, let's say, leave, I want to say Oakview maybe, and go to Woods Creek might technically be a farther away school, but in this instance, it would be the closest school with available capacity long-term for your neighborhood, so that ideally we can assign you there and let you stay. Because again, like I said, the crowding at Oakview is intense, and that capping is going to continue for a while until we come up with some other solutions. So we were doing what we could to provide as much relief as possible using the areas that were as close to Woods Creek as possible. So we were looking for a contiguous, somewhat proximate attendance area that helped us to get the right number of students to help it fill up gradually. So again, I will be honest and recognize we do know that sometimes that's not your closest assignment. And I think that was shared in the video, but it maybe is the closest school that would have available capacity for your neighborhood long-term.
Can you please address what the options are for those of us who have calendar application option of none for middle school in the new proposed assignment plan?
Thank you for asking that. We saw that quite a lot in the thought exchange, and we've tried to put some FAQs out there, putting some context to it. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier when I was talking through the calendar application slides, what the none means is that there would no longer be that calendar option with district provided transportation. It does not mean that you can't use the transfer process or even the magnet application process to ask for a school with the calendar that you prefer. It just means that the district is no longer going to guarantee transportation to that particular option. If that particular option is your favorite and it works for your family that you're currently going to, and you want to put in the transfer for that one, we will certainly evaluate those one by one, space availability, all of that. We're going to do everything we can to keep you where you are. If you're eligible for the stability transfers, so I'm going to give a couple of different examples. I have a current student who's getting ready to go into the 6th grade and hasn't yet started at the middle school with the calendar that I want. They wouldn't be eligible for stability transfers because they've never attended the school. So that student would want to use either the magnet or transfer application process to ask for that transfer to that school, and then just know you need to provide your own transportation. If, however, the student is an existing 6th grade student at that school with that calendar application status and today has transportation, they would be eligible under the stability rules to stay for 7th and 8th grade, but again, the transportation would simply be removed. And I say simply, that's probably not the right term. I get that can have a major impact on families. It's just we do need to provide some relief to our transportation system because we just have so many routes in the district that need to be addressed.
How is stability and proximity being kept when we're being sent to a school further away? You kind of touched this already, but I wanted to ask.
Absolutely. So stability comes to us in a couple of forms. Stability would either be trying to keep you at the school you're already at, and so that's where the stability rules kick in during a reassignment time period. The second half of stability that we think about during an enrollment proposal process is the assignment that we're recommending you change into. Will that be a nice, sustainable, long-range assignment? And that's the goal, is to really try to get you into a school where you can go to that school and then kind of stay for a good long while. So we're looking at stability on both sides of that coin when we're talking about a change in assignment. One, what can we do to let families that are impacted by the recommendation stay where they are and just let the new families, kind of take the new assignment? And two, if we do have to change your address and assignment somewhere else, let's really look at all of our projections and our forecasts to make sure that that's an assignment that can last for a good long period of time. For proximity, again, we've talked about this a couple of times. We do look to see how close the school is to your home, but we just, I don't know that it's been said in this particular information session, but we've done it in other public engagement activities. Just as a reminder, the municipalities are the ones who decide where residential and commercial growth and all of those types of plans are going to be approved. The county district is the one that then has to respond to that and figure out whether or not we have schools in those areas. There's no specific partnership, or I should say rule or regulation that says that the towns would have to set aside land for schools or anything like that. That's not part of their responsibilities. So we do try to partner with them as much as possible to know when those residential developments are coming so that we can try to find sites and do site selection and identify schools to support that growth. But it's not always perfect. And so sometimes we find a site that maybe isn't the closest to where some of these developments are coming, but it is closer than the next closest school with available capacity. So you'll hear me use a phrase, it's the closest school to your area with available capacity. And so that's really sometimes where we have to go with proximity as well.
Why are the new housing developments not being the first selected to utilize new infrastructure?
Amazing question. And I really think it's the same conversation that or the sort of same response that I just gave you before. So in the case of Woods Creek Elementary in particular, since we can use that as an example from today's session, there are a handful of new residential developments that are coming online that are projected to be part of the base attendance area for the school. So those are definitely considerations that were taken into consideration when developing this recommendation. However, because of where new development occurs, it's not always in an area that would logically allow us to sort of jump over another attendance area to create the new attendance area. I don't think I answered that very clearly, but because of the way that the developments come online, they may or may not be in close proximity to this existing school or this new school. And so we're just sort of juggling and balancing all of these pillars all at one time. I get that as an individual, you're thinking, hey, I live in this house, I purchased this house, this is where I really want to go to school. Yet you're also in a high growth area. And so that brings its own challenges. And as I said, with developers and not being responsible for setting aside school or land for schools, we are working as best as we can to be in partnership and to do the best that we can do. But sometimes it needs to be a combination of existing neighborhoods and new neighborhoods to fill a new school. In addition, when we're talking about a new school in particular, a new school needs to have students in that first couple of years while it's waiting for the rest of those developments to come online. So it's a little bit of both to start establishing that community for the school, as well as to be ready to accept those students that are coming from the new developments. So it's kind of all of that mixed together, and it is complex. And I do understand that sometimes that means that families that are being recommended to change, it's just not what you would prefer. And we do understand that, and we do have compassion for that. So we get that this can be challenging.
What is the thought behind not offering district transportation for those eligible for a stability transfer?
Sure. That kind of goes along the lines of the district transportation being slowly removed for some of the calendar application choices. Just the current transportation network that we have, our ability to offer sustained transportation to stability transfers, it's just not there. It's just not feasible. We wouldn't be able to honor all of those requests. And so it's the best way for the district to move forward would be to reroute those buses to the new assignment and to take the students to those new schools. So it's really about just that pressure on our transportation system.
Will the board actually make changes based on the feedback from the comments collected?
Fair question. Each year, the board has to weigh and evaluate all of the information that's been shared and all the feedback that's been collected. Last year, I saw a couple of recommendations that were adjusted based on feedback that was received through the thought exchange. So it's definitely a possibility. And the board often has lots of questions for us as we get into that draft 2 period to see, where are we at, what revisions are being made. So yes, it is quite possible that the board would make recommended provisions based on the feedback that they're hearing from parents.
Will I be allowed to make 2-minute comments at the end of this meeting?
This is not a public comment forum or a hearing for the board, so the full board's not present. So public comment, if you would like to do that, the best way to do that would be the November 8th hearing. However, if you do have comments or feedback you want to make sure gets shared, again, put it in the thought exchange, or you can share it in the Q&A feature. And in a moment, I will share my email address. If you have individual, personal, family questions that you'd like to ask, you could also send information to me that way. I just want to caution you that if it's not in the thought exchange, all of the board members may not see it. And so that's just really the power of using that tool for being our public comment capture tool.
Why are some neighborhoods allowed to have 2 calendar options, whereas Woods Creek Elementary will not have any? If it's a transportation issue, couldn't one of those routes be used to allow Woods Creek Elementary a calendar option with transportation?
Great comment, and something for us to consider. Currently, we hadn't had a recommendation for a traditional calendar option for the Woods Creek base that comes with transportation. And so that's something we can certainly consider. To this first part of the question, though, about the 2 options, some of those are historical assignments, and so we are working to reduce those. In some cases, if there are 2 choices, it's not that each family has 2 choices. But if I can kind of use my hands, if I have an attendance area maybe that's long, it could be that the northern portion has an option that goes in one direction for transportation efficiency, and the southern portion has an option that's in the other direction. So generally speaking, we've been working really hard to reduce that burden on transportation to be going in 3 different directions from one attendance area. Right now, I don't feel that there's going to be a recommendation to have a traditional calendar option with transportation for Woods Creek, but that's certainly something that can be considered as we go through draft 2. Again, I always just don't want to give false hope, but I do want to make sure that we're hearing those thoughts and we're really digesting and evaluating those. So we'll take that under advice and really look at that and evaluate that before we present draft 2.
If you have a current 6th grader at Apex Friendship Middle School, can they complete 7th and 8th grade if you provide transportation?
Yes. Easy question. That was awesome. I like that one. Yes. Just remember that, and I will do my pitch for the stability transfer. Just make sure you pay attention to all that incoming email shortly after the Thanksgiving holiday break, because that's when you'll get all your instructions on how to submit that request, because we will automatically sort of default to the new base. So you will need to put in that request to ask to stay, but we will absolutely approve it as long as you put it in during that window.
Our base school is currently Banks Road, and it is proposed that we be moved to Westlake. We are also in the proposed new Hilltop Needmore zone. Does this mean we would be changing schools twice?
Great question. No, this means that because of the opening of Hilltop Needmore, we were looking at your area to be reassigned to provide that relief for Banks. So this would actually remove you from that impact area for Hilltop Needmore going forward. So no, you would not be reassigned twice. Thank you for asking that.
How can you require a move to a year-round school changing from a traditional school without offering a traditional option? And I think you've gone over this.
We recognize that this presents a challenge for families. And so again, those of you that are trying to raise your hand, if you'll please just use the thought exchange or the Q&A feature. We won't be able to take verbal comments tonight. This is not a public hearing, so we hadn't built in that feature. So recognizing the crowding that we have, the enrollment growth that's happening in the area, the year-round calendar, obviously, I think that we've made that case as to why we're making that recommendation from a staff perspective for operational efficiency. The transportation option for the traditional calendar, again, it's just a challenge that we're facing with so many students. I don't know if everybody realizes we have close to 200 schools across the district, all of which needing their base attendance area transportation. We also have a handful of schools that have application status, and so that's an additional set of bus routes. And so the more that we can reduce the pressure on those calendar application choices, the more we can provide enhanced service for our base assignment areas and for our magnet options. So it's just where we are. We just built a really complex transportation network based on all the choices that came with transportation. And so we're just trying to relieve that pressure and reduce that pressure on the system. Families still, like I said, could put in an application for a magnet school on a traditional calendar if that's something that would benefit your family, or they could put in a regular transfer during the request for transfer window later in the spring for a different school on a traditional calendar, and we will evaluate those one by one, case by case basis based on your request.
Why was Marion neighborhood selected for this proposal when Woods Creek is significantly farther away, both in time and distance, from our current school, Apex Elementary, and many other schools we pass?
A different phrasing. I think it's a similar question to ones we've answered before, but step one is we're talking about schools that need relief because they're capped or overcrowded, and so we're looking at that. And then the second piece is we're looking for the school closest to you that has available capacity for a sustained period of time. And so that's why the recommendation is being made for the area that's currently assigned to Apex Elementary. Just so you know, I sort of briefly mentioned, we also know that there are going to be some future impacts in this general region, particularly for the Woods Creek area and the Oakview area and that sort of thing as Felton Grove High School opens up. And so we're also thinking ahead to how these types of recommendations might align with that high school assignment over time as well. I'm not making promises. There's no map for Felton Grove just yet, but we were trying to think forward into that space as well to make sure that we're giving families a nice K-12 feeder pattern continuity as well over time.
Does the district consider how many changes a neighborhood has undergone in the past few years?
Absolutely, we sure do. One of the stability rules that's sort of in our policy guidance is that if it doesn't sound great, I'm going to just admit that, but if we try not to move neighborhoods any more frequently than every 3 years. Honestly, we prefer to not do it at all. We prefer really that once this family gets, or an address area gets an assignment to a particular school, that can be their assignment long term. But in high growth areas, we are mindful to try at the very least to keep it to 3-year windows. We again recognize that's not ideal. Certainly a longer time span would be preferred, and we offer those as much as we can. But the sort of guidance that we have is that worst case scenario, we don't want to do an impact more frequently than every 3 years at a particular level, of course.
This question is about calendar alignment. How does this work with one kid in elementary, middle, and high when they're all on different schedules?
Great question. And we face this in some of our areas where we have so many different calendars working with us. We recognize that, again, the majority of our high schools are on traditional calendars. So that kind of presents its case, and that's kind of where that is. So if you're talking about an area where maybe by your stability choices, you're going to keep an elementary school student on a traditional calendar through stability choice, and maybe by base assignment, they're at a multi-track year-round middle for the other student. We would certainly work with families to help you align your calendars either through the magnet or transfer application process. If it's the other way around and you have a multi-track year-round elementary student and a traditional middle and a traditional high, and that works for your family, again, we look at those case by case, but that's part of why we have those two different application processes, the magnet application process, as well as the transfer request process, so that we can help you find ways to align calendars for your family.
This is a good one. Can families outside of the proposed areas volunteer to go to the new school?
Haha, excellent question. So the short answer is sort of. The way that a family who's not in the proposed area, who's interested in going to the new school, would put in that request would be through the normal request for transfer process in the springtime. So once we see what's going on with stability transfers, once we see what's going on with new enrollment and projected enrollment, oftentimes in the first year or two of a new school operation, we can approve a handful of transfers into the school because it's not fully filled out with its base attendance area yet. So yes, that is always a possibility. But again, that would be without transportation.
Lots of talk about transportation. We drive our kids to school. If we ask for our current school, Oakview, how likely will we get in? Since we are currently enrolled, and do we get advantage to get in?
So this would be where the stability rules would kick in. If your student is a rising 4th or 5th grader, if one of your students is a rising 4th or 5th grader, then you could use that stability transfer process. Not a problem. We'll get that guaranteed. If you also have younger siblings that can attach to that, rising 4th or 5th grader, even an entering kindergartner, they can be approved to stay as well. And then you can provide your transportation. If you have younger students who the oldest is no more than rising into the 3rd grade, then those would be a case-by-case basis as we get to the spring. And again, I don't want to give false hope. We do recognize that Oakview is a CAP school. It has a high growth area, lots of residential development coming in the area. So if you're not in the attendance area, the likelihood that we could approve a transfer back into it if you're not eligible under the stability rules would be lower. But I don't want to say it's impossible, but it certainly would require you explaining your hardship and all of that. So I just want to be honest about that, particularly with the Oakview example because of the crowding that's there.
Are all families in the district losing future transportation to calendar application schools?
If you'll look at the slides that I showed you, yes, throughout the district over the last, I want to say 3 enrollment proposals, we've been slowly reducing the amount of transportation that's available for calendar options across the entire district. So yes, it is getting much reduced year over year.
Are stability transfers applicable to keeping a student on the same calendar if they are going from elementary to middle? When is the stability transfer window?
Okay. So stability transfers are specifically about keeping students at their current school. So if I have a 5th grader that's rising into 6th grade, there would not be a stability transfer that they would be eligible for because they haven't yet attended that middle school. Or a rising 9th grader hasn't yet attended that high school. In this area, there's no high school recommendations. So that would be something to consider. But the stability transfer window will be in late November, early December. We'll share the specific dates during our Draft 2 presentation on October 17th. And we will also start reaching out to families shortly after that to just give them some information so they can put a little note on their calendar as to when to be looking for future emails. So I will take a moment and share that. When we present the Draft 2 at the October 17th work session, we will also at that point, as a district, start sending out direct messages to families that are still included in the recommendation to say, hey, if you haven't yet had a chance to look, please look. The board is considering, this as a final review when they get to November. So if you'd like to make a public comment or, go to the public hearing, we'll have an additional information session between the Draft 2 release and the final presentation as well. So we will start communicating with you directly because once we're into Draft 2, it's starting to feel a little bit more likely that you will be impacted by the recommendation. So we'll start communicating with you directly. Once the board does make a final, approves a final plan on November 21st, shortly after that, we will send direct communications out specifically to families that are directly personally impacted by the recommendations and the changes, and give you those instructions on how to put in that stability transfer as well.
Will there be any assurance for same track across schools for siblings?
So generally, our principals work really hard to get our families on the same track. So yes, I can say that the principals will work with families. They'll start that work very early on. Once the plan's approved and they know which students are coming, the principals will start doing outreach to families to help make that calendar alignment possible. So yes, if you have multi-track year-round at elementary and multi-track year-round at middle, we'll get you all on the same track. Absolutely.
What is the actual chance you will approve a transfer to a school other than Woods Creek? I think they pass a few schools on their way to Oakview.
Again, it's all going to be based on the individual school that you're requesting. So I gave an example earlier. If you're asking for a school that's capped or severely overcrowded, our ability to approve transfers into those schools for anybody is really reduced. So if you're looking for a school that's maybe less crowded, that you can provide transportation to, that would open up our ability to potentially be able to approve that request. So it's case by case. I don't want to overpromise, but I do want to say that your best shot would then be to either use the Magna application process, or in the transfer process, you can explain your specific reasons for wanting the transfer and kind of pick that hardship box and really tell us why it is that you want it. And we'll look at those individually one by one. But I do want to caution, if you're asking for a seat at a capped or overcrowded school, that does limit staff's ability to approve those, because those kind of go against policy. They go against policy.
I think you've touched this before, but was there consideration on neighborhoods who were previously redistricted to a new middle school and are now being moved to an older middle school?
Absolutely. We do take those things into consideration, and we do recognize that sometimes going from a newer middle school to a less new middle school, or any school, elementary or high school, may not be a preferred option for families. But we also have to balance our need as a district to utilize all of our facilities efficiently and to sort of honor those requests about feeder pattern and calendar alignment. So we do recognize that that can happen, particularly I think in this region, when we're thinking about maybe like an Apex Friendship, that's a newer school that's already capped. As we relieve that, there are no new middle schools coming in the area in the near term. You didn't see any on the CIP plan. That's not to say they're not coming sometime, just not in the next 7 years or so. So yes, we did weigh that and consider that. However, the other pillars, such as operational efficiency and the feeder pattern and stability pieces, trumped that in this set of recommendations.
Another good one. Once you complete a stability transfer request, will you have to complete the request the next year as well to continue at that same school? Do you have to make a request each year if in 6th grade, or does one request keep you there through the end?
The short answer is no. Once you get that stability transfer, it's going to be good through what we call the terminal grade. So if in this example, once you put in that request for your rising 7th grader, it would be good through the 8th grade. You don't have to do anything. We would presume you want to stay there through the 8th grade. So if you would, in fact, it's so solid that if you moved out of the area, technically you would still have that seat at that school, and you'd need to let us know if you wanted to go to the new school for your new area. So it is a solid transfer, or I don't want to say permanent, but it's basically like that, where it'll go through that terminal grade. At the elementary level, again, it would go all the way through the 5th grade. And that's for any stability transfer.
As far as keeping cohorts together, are all of the rising 2nd graders at Oakview going to be on the same track?
That I cannot guarantee, because that's a site-based decision where families will work with the principal to try to figure out what's going to be the best track alignment. So families will work with the principals to determine their track placement as they go. I don't know that they could all fit on a single track, or that they would all be placed on the same track, but that's something certainly to take up when we get to that point.
I know it's 7:24, so we're going to take the last few questions. All of my 3 kids are 3 years apart at school, so having a sibling doesn't help with middle school. Does prior attendance have any bearing? And I'm assuming this is a stability transfer question.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll hear the term legacy, do we have legacy transfers? Unfortunately, we don't. So as a student, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you might have one rising into ninth grade while one's rising into sixth grade, and they won't be at middle school together to be able to hook up for that sibling transfer. When we get to that stage and that student is rising into sixth grade, that's kind of in the middle of the pack, we would look at that as an individual request for transfer. And I can't make promises this far out about whether or not there'd still be seat availability for that student to be able to attend there. So we would look at those and do everything we could to help your family, stay on that same calendar and all those sorts of things. But I do have to stop short of saying that we could guarantee that, because the stability transfers, or really even the sibling joining component of any of our transfers, does require that they both be at the school at the same time. So we don't officially have any kind of a legacy policy at this time, and haven't historically.
This is a calendar option and transfer question. Are you saying that we can just pick any school/calendar to apply to as long as we provide transportation, even though the option says none?
The short answer is yes. And then the long answer is I would just encourage you to be mindful about what you list as your choices. If it's an overcrowded or capped school, that's going to limit staff's ability to say yes to the transfer. So do think about a school that you can get you can provide transportation to, but also maybe has some available seats. So that's all I would say. But yes, during the request for transfer period, you can ask for any middle school in the district for any one of your personal hardship reasons, and staff will look at those one by one in accordance with policy.
What is going on with Woods Creek Middle?
You noticed it's not on the current CIP plan. The land is there so that when the funds become available in a future bond, it can be added to a future construction plan. But right now there are more urgent needs in other parts of the county that have sort of gobbled up those funds. But I know that it is on the minds of our board and our facilities team in thinking about when will be the right time to put that into the construction plan. So it is on everyone's mind. We do have the land available for it, but it has yet to be funded for construction. So it'll be a little bit before it gets built. Before we take the last question, I do want to say that any questions we weren't able to get to today, we're going to do our absolute best to create more frequently asked questions and update those to our website. In addition, any of the questions that we've answered live today that weren't already on the website, we'll put there as well, so that there's a resource for other families. So I would ask you to maybe look back closer to Friday on the frequently asked questions section of our webpage to see if any of the questions you asked, maybe if we didn't get to them, because it sounds like we had quite a few that maybe we didn't get to every single individual question, but I think we're getting to the ones that were duplicates. We will continue to work to get those questions answered for you.
If my current kids are granted stability transfer at current school, will younger siblings not yet rising kinder be grandfathered in future years as long as one older kid is in?
Okay. This is a dynamic answer. I want to say no, because at that point, it would no longer be the stability transfer. It would just be the normal transfer rule. So the good answer is it's yes. As long as there's an older student that will continue to attend the school, if there's a rising kindergartner that puts in a request to join that older sibling, we can approve that through our normal, regular, everyday transfer policy. That doesn't require any specific stability rules. Stability rules are really only significantly important in the first year of the change. So it's a good news answer. It's just I want to make sure we're using the right terms. You won't get an invitation at that point in time to put in what we call the stability transfer, because it won't be about that year's enrollment plan. You'll just use the normal traditional request for transfer period, check the sibling box, and then we'll be able to do it that way.
I just wanted to say thank you all for attending. I'm going to let Susan close out our session. This is recorded. I will post it on our website tomorrow so you can play back and listen to the questions. And we will also post or update our FAQ page with some of these questions.
So I do want to thank you, and we really hope that this session at least helped you to understand how the recommendations came to be, how they're working, how it might personally impact you. We do really appreciate you asking those open and honest and difficult questions, and hopefully we've given you a better sense of understanding in response to those questions. Anything that we can include and will be incorporated into the second draft, and again, that'll be October 17th, and then the board will have their public hearing on November 8th and take up the final plan for review and of hopeful approval on November 21st. Our thought exchange will remain open through October 6th. If you post questions after today's session, don't feel the need to put in the session 3 if you don't want to. You can just put them in as a general comment, but if you want to make sure that we know that it was related to this area, you can continue to use that hashtag. And again, any comments or questions that you put in the Q&A section may or may not be fully shared with all of the board because they're not in that thought exchange, but we will try to capture them through the frequently asked questions portion of our website. I also want to thank Corrali Turnow for being our host. I want to thank our moderators who've been feverishly making sure we capture all of those questions, Dr. April Hill and Carrie Kite from our Student Assignment Office. A special thank you to our board members that were able to join us today, Ms. Mahaffey, Ms. Edmonds, and Ms. Johnson-Hostler, and of course, our Assistant Superintendent for School Choice Planning and Assignment, Glenn Carissa. We will post this recording to the website as quickly as we can, and just appreciate all of your time this evening and wish you a good rest of the evening. Thank you.
Susan, are you going to show your email address?
Oh my goodness, thank you. Right. We do recognize that some families might have individual personal questions that you really just want to make sure you get that individual answer to that wouldn't really be appropriate in an online forum. Please feel free to use my email now, it's mine. So please use it judiciously. But if you have a question about your family, please feel free to send it to me directly, and either I or one of my staff members will follow up with you. Y también si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net. Thank you so much again for your time and attention, and thank you, Corrali, for the reminder.
Thank you all. Good night.